All right, welcome everybody. My name is Josh Horowitz. I'm the Dana Feitler Professor of the Practice at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in the Department of Health Policy and Management, and proudly the co-director at the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. Today, we're talking about safe storage laws as a proven life-saving intervention. We want to talk about our new model policy guide. That is a new product that helps legislators and advocates and others understand all the facets of good safe storage practices and laws. I want to introduce an incredible panel that we have today. And I also want to encourage people to ask questions. So if you use the Q&A function here, we will get to those questions at the when we get the Q&A at the end. So please put your questions in the Q&A. I believe the chat function is not working, is disabled right now. So please do that, and we'll get your questions at the end. So we have a great panel today, and a very moving and important one as well. So I want to introduce Dr. Cassandra Crofasi, who's an associate professor at the Bloomberg School of Public Health in the Department of Health Policy and Management, and is also co-director with me of the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. Dr. Catherine Hoops is the director of clinical programs and practices at the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions, and attending physician in the pediatric intensive care unit. And then we are very lucky and honored to be joined by Representative Athena Hollins, Democratic Whip of the Minnesota House of Representatives. We want to thank our friends from Minnesota today, especially Maggie Emery and our friends at Protect Minnesota, and express our deep condolences and outrage for the horrific acts of political violence in Minnesota that took the lives of Minnesota Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark, and injured Representative John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette. Representative Hollins, thank you for being with us. And before we jump into safe storage, I want to give you some time. We can reflect a little bit, if you'd like, on the shooting that happened there. I know it's affected you personally. And I just want to know, first of all, how are you and your colleagues doing?
Thank you so much, Josh. It's really an honor to be here. I'm, very excited to be here talking about this issue. I think I would say that we are struggling. Um, this this act of violence against our leadership and against our colleagues has been horrific. And the fact that there was a list with people's names on it that made it so that we could not be together, that we had to isolate, and weren't able to grieve together, it was incredibly heartbreaking. This is my first experience being a victim of gun violence, and it's really taken a toll on all of us. So I'm pleased to report that they have caught the perpetrator or the suspect, and he is in custody. But I think the reality is we can't go back to being the way we were, because this trauma is going to impact us indefinitely.
Yeah, and for those of us who've been affected by gun violence, it's life-changing, never, and I'm sorry that you're going through that and your colleagues are going through that. And it's just a very difficult thing to go through. Um, what do you know, what's going on the ground in Minnesota? So the person has been caught.
Yep. Yes, the person's been caught. I think there's continued investigations to ensure that he was acting alone, but as far as folks know, he was acting on his own. So there is not an additional risk that we know of. Of course, there's always concerns about copycat individuals and actions. And I think at this moment, we're just trying to get together as a caucus and a team to mourn the loss of, not just our leader, but our friend, Melissa Hortman, and, um, the loss for the entire state of Minnesota.
Yeah,
She's been a dedicated civil servant for many, many decades, and it's just a tremendous heartache.
we've been reading about her and an incredible legacy that she left behind, and we just want to again express our deep condolences to the whole caucus, to the state, but also to you. And thank you again for being brave and being here today. And the last thing I'll say, and this is something that in fact, my book is over my shoulder over there, but I've written about writing about political violence for a long time. And I remember at the beginning when I started writing about it, people were like, oh, that's not an issue. It's never going to happen here. But now it has regularly. Now that you've lived through this, do you have any thoughts about what we could do to reduce that, to tone it down, to what do you want to see happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, the number one thing is the rhetoric that we're hearing across platforms, across the media that is so divisive and dehumanizing. It is totally unacceptable for us to characterize, honestly, either side in these incredibly divisive ways. And I think, especially for people who are not involved in politics, they believe what folks say, right? We know that behind closed doors across the aisle, we work together, we have communications, we have mutual respect for each other, even if we don't agree on issues. But when we publicly say horrible things about the other side, it creates a divisiveness that allows this sort of violence to perpetrate and to perpetuate. And I think the reality is most people are living in their information bubbles and silos that keep them from understanding the diverse perspectives and understanding, trying to see both sides of a situation. And I think that's really what leads to this. And I think that both we as politicians have an obligation to do better, but also I need the media to do
Right.
better. I need social media to do better, and I need, professional media outlets to do better because there's absolutely no reason that we should be expecting civil servants expecting to have to deal with something as horrific as this. Nobody signed up for this,
Yeah, nor
you
should
know.
they, nor should they have to. So I think that's exactly right. In our Defending Democracy reports, which you have at the center, we've said, that toning down the rhetoric and especially from the top, right, matters. People and so that goes for every executive, but also people who are in the public eye. We just you got to do better, and we got to realize that we're all in this together. We may have different approaches, but we're all in this together, and we cannot enemize. We can't make enemies of our political opponents. They're not our enemies.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
So,
We all want what's best for our country and our states.
right, right. And so, talking about what's best, safe storage is a good idea. So, it's no easy transition, but safe storage will save lives, and I think it's something that can be very bipartisan. So, in the spirit of coming together around certain things, let's think about safe storage a little bit today. And one of the things that we've done, we want to bring this together, is because we have a number of products. So this month, so it's Gun Violence Awareness Month, and so one of the things that we've done is we have a safe storage toolkit for everybody that people can use and understand. And how do you talk to your neighbors, friends? What are the different policy options out there? And you can just look at this QR code right here, and you can find that great resource that we put together for Gun Violence Awareness Month. But there's also but we also have a model policy guide, and that's the subject of what we're talking about today. And that model policy guide gives a lot of both technical and common sense tips for legislators and advocates who want to see these laws drawn up well, that we want to pass good policy, that we want policy that we can implement. And so we're going to make sure that we're going to walk through that today and share some of that information about what's in that guide, but also why this is so important. And so again, I want you to put your questions in the QR, but not, sorry, in the Q&A. But then please, let's welcome Professor Krafasi. Cass, thanks for being here. I really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. Um, so if you could, thank you, Joe. So as Josh mentioned, we've got this guide and we're going to spend a little bit of time going over the various elements, but I really wanted to start off kind of anchoring us about why this guide was so important. So just to sort of level set a few things. First, overall in the US, guns are the leading cause of death for young people age 1 to 17. This is an age group that can't legally go out and buy guns on their own. They're getting them from their homes, homes of family members and friends. And so safe storage is one of the most important interventions that we can do to separate these young people from firearms. And I like to sort of think about the exposure analogy with motor vehicles. Most of us have seen a car today. Most of us have probably driven in a car today. Many young people across the country also likely have seen a motor vehicle today. Most kids aren't seeing cars on a daily basis, yet overall, for our young people, guns are responsible for more deaths than motor vehicles. So thinking about the magnitude of the exposure versus the magnitude of death when these young people can't buy guns on their own, it's so important, again, to be thinking about safe storage. So we created this model policy guide to really help shape conversations to create the most robust and effective laws that we can have around safe storage. And this guide highlights where and how guns should be stored, liability and public awareness, and data and accountability. And it really comes down to providing actionable recommendations for policymakers. And I'll go into these in more detail in a moment, but we have 20 recommendations across 11 themes to really identify the various ways we need to be thinking about improving safe storage laws. Next slide. So thinking about some of this motivation, making sure we're thinking and talking about the same thing. I want to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say safe storage. What do we as a center propose? So we think that the best way to store your firearms is to store them unloaded, locked up, and separate from ammunition. For those who own firearms for home defense, there are quick access options with key codes or biometrics that can allow you to gain access to your firearms quickly in an emergency should you need one while still conferring that safe storage. And for those who may be at greater risk, you may want to temporarily not have firearms in the home. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on this specific piece because I know Dr. Hoops is going to talk about some of this later on. But as I'm talking about some of these recommendations, I want to make sure that we're all clear about what do we mean about safe storage? Guns unloaded, locked up, preferably separate from ammunition. If you go to the next slide. I also want to acknowledge that safe storage is just one of many interventions, both on the policy side, very directly to address multiple forms of violence, but also in the context of safe storage and exposure to firearms. Safe and secure storage is just one piece in that spectrum of interventions, and you can scan these QR codes to take you out to the guide. But I just want to sort of take a moment to orient us there. Next slide. So I wanted to bring us back again before we dig into some of the details of these policies, just to remind us in 2023, which is the last year that we have complete data, more than 45,000 people died from firearm-related injuries, and many of these are preventable. We understand how these can be prevented. We understand different risk and protective factors, and safe storage is a really key piece of separating those who may be at risk or in a time of crisis from firearms to limit the harms that can come from that. And it's essential that we have these really strong laws to make sure that we can limit these injuries. So as of right now, we have safe storage laws in 26 states and the District of Columbia. And the components and the requirements can vary across states. The guide gives you a really great tool in the back. There's a table that shows you all 50 states, the various components, and you can see in your state which components do your laws have and where might there be opportunities to intervene. This variation is really important because it contributes to some of those differences in outcomes that we see. You can see 26 states and DC, so a little bit more than half of the states have these laws. Many don't, but this variation can translate into real impact. Just in Baltimore, a little bit more than a week ago, a young girl found her grandmother's unsecured firearm, unintentionally shot herself, and died as a result. Around the same time, a young boy found his dad's rifle that he had put up, not locked up, but had put up, and he found that unsecured rifle and unintentionally shot and killed his younger sister. So these are real lives. These are real children that can be impacted. And so I just want to make sure that when we're talking about the nuts and bolts of policy, we're not losing sight of that. And I know that Dr. Hoops is going to talk a little bit more about this also, but safe storage is an effective way to limit some of these tragedies. Next slide. So here is the sort of big buckets, the 11 themes that we have for these safe storage recommendations, and I'm going to talk through some of these a little bit. So again, thinking about when and how firearms should be stored, liability, public awareness, and data and accountability. Those are our big buckets that we have used to orient this. So we recommend that firearms should be stored securely when they're not in direct control by the person who owns them. And that means they're not sort of physically on your person or within immediate reach. We also think that these laws should include a child access prevention component. So it's not just about storing guns safely, but making sure that young people who can't legally buy guns on their own aren't able to access them. But we also extend that to other prohibited persons, whether they're prohibited for a mental health issue, a criminal history, or just youthful age. We want to make sure that if you can't legally buy guns, you shouldn't have easy access to them. And so making sure that these laws include preventing access by people who can't lawfully buy them. I've largely mentioned the home, but this extends to vehicles as well. We want to make sure that firearms sort of not physically on your person or in direct control, like if you have a concealed carry license, for example, you may have it on your person. Those firearms should also be stored securely. When we're thinking about how they should be stored, this goes back to one of the early points I made. We think that they should be stored locked and in hard side containers. That's our preference. A gun safe, a lockbox, some kind of hard-sided container. There are other options that could be a strategy if needed, but we're sort of here recommending the gold standard, which would be a hard-sided container, and we think they should be stored unloaded. Same with vehicles, locked, hard-sided case, out of plain sight. Far too often, guns are stolen from cars as a crime of opportunity, so making sure they're stored safely in cars is equally important. When we come to liability and public awareness, you can see those big buckets there. Again, we're thinking about strict liability, so we need to make sure that we're holding people accountable and that this liability should be negligence-based. So if you know or reasonably should have known that someone could gain access to them, then they should be stored safely. And again, extending not just to children, which is an important piece, but taking those gun access prevention standards to apply to other prohibiting conditions as well. We think that people need to be aware. This public awareness piece is really important because if you don't know the law, it makes it a lot harder to follow them. But making sure that firearm dealers, licensed dealers, or others are distributing safe storage information to gun purchasers. So if I'm buying a gun for the first time, I'm aware of what the requirements are for storage, and posting conspicuous signs to make sure that anyone coming into a shop is going to be aware of this information. We also think that safe storage information should be distributed to parents or caregivers at K through 12 schools. This is, again, normalizing the conversation around safe and secure storage, because with the right to gun ownership come important responsibilities and making sure everyone is aware. Even if you don't own firearms, having the information so that you can ask when you send your kids to a play date, for example, making sure that people know what the standards are. And we think that information should be created in partnership with the health department in the state to make sure that it's relevant to the state, tailored to the state, and also with the best available public health information. And the last big bucket are data and accountability. And here we're thinking some of the penalties. There may be options for criminal or civil penalties if people are not choosing to store their firearms safely. If those guns are accessed by a minor or other prohibited person, there may be an additional penalty. But making sure that these are not sort of over the top. We want to hold people accountable, but not have something that is too strict, and so having them capped at misdemeanor offenses. And then we want to make sure that we're gathering data. As a public health researcher, that data is so important. And so thinking about, do we have data on arrests, outcomes, educational material distribution, all of those pieces to make sure that individuals are tracking this data and able to follow to make sure that it's being used. Next slide. The last thing I just want to bring us back to, again, I showed some data on injuries and deaths in the home, out of the home, et cetera. But it's too important of a point to not stress again stolen firearms. Guns that are not stored safely are more likely to be stolen. Guns stolen from cars and homes are then more likely to be used in scenes of crimes and recovered in crime, meaning that they could be used to cause havoc in communities across the country. So it's important both from a policy perspective, but also individual behaviors to make sure that we are storing guns safely. With that, I'll wrap up this portion and turn it back to you, Josh.
Thanks, Cass. And let's go. So I appreciate that. That's really great information. Let's go to Representative Hollins.
Thank you so much, Josh. So the first thing I wanted to say, I feel like it's always an important disclaimer as a legislator, is that I am not an expert on anything, really. Um, I I am a law-abiding gun owner, which I think is the reason why I was tapped in to work on this particular piece of legislation. And I wanted to just highlight in my slides my reason why. These are my kids. This is important to me on a very personal level because I have conversations with parents on a weekly basis where my kids are going for play dates, and I am trying to normalize the idea that we ask people about their firearms and we ask if they are safely stored. And I am hoping that more parents start asking me if I have a firearm and if it is safely stored. So, because I know as a person who I grew up around guns. I shot my first gun when I was 10 years old. I am very aware of firearm safety, and I am also aware that children are curious. They want to know about things, they want to feel things. They see it on TV and in movies, and it does not matter how smart your child is or how educated in gun safety they are going to want to interact with firearms. And that is why it is so important to me that we have this conversation and that we continue having this conversation and try to normalize this conversation. And this legislation is really a part of that normalization, in my opinion. The other reason why was because in 2023, in 2023 and 2024, the Minnesota legislature had a trifecta. So it was democratically controlled House, Senate, and governor. And we had a tremendous opportunity to pass a number of gun safety provisions, including red flag laws and background checks. And safe storage was another one of those provisions that we were really hoping to get across the finish line. Unfortunately, we weren't able to um, because it had become divisive in a number of ways that I'll talk about in a little while. But what happened because of that was that I started paying closer attention to the news about what was happening in the state of Minnesota. And one of the things that I noted when I presented an amendment to bring this forward was how many accidental gun deaths there had been in the state of Minnesota, because it was terrifying. From the time when we had adjourned in 2024 to when we got back in 2025, there was almost one child being killed per month by accidental gun deaths. And what I really highlighted, and I'm going to go through these really quickly because I think it's important to note that they are not exclusively in the metro area or in greater Minnesota. It is across the board and in a variety of different ways. But it all comes back to the fact that these guns are not being stored safely in a way that keeps society and communities as well as children themselves safe. So when I started paying attention, I noted in July, a 6-year-old in Wabasha County in greater Minnesota was left unattended in a car with a loaded shotgun where he shot himself. In September, a 16-year-old accidentally shot his best friend in New Hope, Minnesota. In October, a 3-year-old boy in Northeast Minneapolis shot himself when he found a handgun while his parents were sleeping. In November, a 13-year-old boy in Minneapolis accidentally shot himself while playing with a gun that had been left at a party that had been held at his house. And in December, a 3-year-old in Otter Tail County shot himself with a loaded handgun that was kept by his parents. Now, the thing that I continue to bring attention to is if 5 children had died in 5 months from any other cause, we would be up in arms. It would be considered an epidemic. If 5 children died of measles in 5 months, people would be outraged and there would be precautions being taken. We would not allow that to continue. But because of the rhetoric that we hear and because of the powerful lobbying that exists, this continues to be a divisive issue, even when we know it shouldn't be. Can we go to the next slide? So Minnesota needs safe storage now. I did a little bit of math because we know that there are firearms in approximately 1/3 of Minnesota households, and only half of those are stored securely. So that means that there are 387,883 unsecured firearms in the state of Minnesota. And statistically, it's a lot more than that because we know that most people that have firearms have more than one. Additionally, there's been rising firearm-related deaths and injuries in the state of Minnesota. I think we had some great statistics about, the rate of gun deaths increasing by 26%, but also that while we had the lowest gun homicide rate in the country in 2022, it has been increasing substantially since that time. And the increase is one of the highest increases in the country. And furthermore, the reality is that unsecured guns are used in suicides, domestic violence situations, and school shootings. And one thing I always feel is important to note is we get a lot of attention for these public shootings, like school shootings and things that happen in malls or movie theaters, which are horrific, absolutely. But the reality is, just like domestic violence, right? Most violence that's perpetrated is not these random accounts. They get a lot of press attention, but that is a boogeyman for what is actually happening. And what's actually happening is children, young people, domestic partners are finding unsecured firearms and are using them against themselves, accidentally or on purpose, and against people in the household. And so I think it's really important to note that this is something that we can actually control. I think there's a lot of trepidation around public shootings for good reason. We don't have control over that, but this is something that we do have control over. We can make a simple change that would decrease substantially the risk of harm and death. And so for me, it's really important that we continue to focus on changing the things that we can do to make ourselves safer rather than worrying and spending a lot of time on things that we cannot control. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities within the political landscape of creating these safe storage laws. So I think the number one challenge is the political polarization around gun legislation. The reality is most people, when you actually poll the public, people are in support of common sense gun provisions. That is not reflected in the legislature. It is not reflected by elected officials. And I am trying to peel back the layers to understand why that is. Because when you talk to well, we know statistically that people are in support of it, but when you talk to politicians, they will be very divided on it. And so the only thing that I can come to is there are a lot of misperceptions about government overreach and Second Amendment concerns. And the lobbying from the gun rights organizations, in particular the NRA, but also we have the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus, spent a lot of time lobbying against these issues in ways that are not particularly truthful or helpful. Finally, I think one of the biggest sticking points for us in Minnesota back in 2023 was a lack of active support from law enforcement. We had some law enforcement organizations say that they were in support of safe storage and then turn around and take that back and say, in fact, they were not in support of it. I think it's very interesting to note that people, I mean, this would protect law enforcement as well, right? I mean, people who are interacting with folks who have guns are safer when those guns are locked up. Um, but some of the pushback that we've gotten was that law enforcement did not want to safely store their firearms or their service firearms, but frankly, they said also any other firearms that they have in their house. Um, because my response to that was, you should absolutely be safely storing your service arms. That's should be a no-brainer responsibility of being in law enforcement. Um, One of the other struggles that we have in the state of Minnesota is that there is a culture of hunting. And so a lot of folks have concerns around how to store firearms for hunting and saying that they have so many firearms that it would be impossible or impractical for them to be able to store them safely and efficiently. Um, I really do think that we need to push back on that narrative because it is not difficult to do. In fact, gun safes are large and you can store them, you can store multiple guns in a gun safe. You can get big ones. And certainly if finances are an aspect of this, that is something that we have talked about and said that we were willing to try to figure out how to help finance that. Because if that's the real barrier for folks, we are here to assist with that. We recognize that not everybody has money, but honestly, if you can afford 4 to 5 shotguns, you can probably afford um, a gun safe. Now, what I think is what makes me hopeful about this is the opportunities. Um, so first of all, of course, the broad public support for responsible gun ownership. I think there is tremendous support when you talk to individuals one-on-one about how important this is and how much sense it makes. One thing that I have heard repeatedly from individuals that does require a more robust conversation is that everybody understands that someone else's gun is worrisome, but people don't recognize that their own gun is also a problem. So I think, to my mind, when discussing it with constituents, helping folks understand that we don't live in silos and you might think that your gun and the people in your house are very safe with them, but it's those other people that are at risk, and bringing them, coming to them with statistics, coming with them with an understanding that your house isn't as safe and secure as you think it is, and that people do things that are unpredictable. I think that really helps them understand. Um, and also bringing the attention to the fact that everybody thinks that they are safe and that other people are not safe. So even if I think I'm really safe, my neighbor thinks they're really safe and that I'm not safe. So like getting a more global understanding of what this looks like and how we all live together and interact together as a society and what that means for our secured firearms. That ties right into the data-driven advocacy with reductions to accidents and suicides. With advanced protections, we have a 78% reduce chance of reduction of unintended, I don't want to say murders, unintended shootings. And that's huge. It's also huge, and we need to recognize that suicides are an enormous problem, especially in rural Minnesota. And part of that is because of the access to firearms that exist in rural Minnesota. If we are able to delay those actions and give people a chance to think about what may or may not need to be done to reach out for help, to contact somebody that they care about, we can interrupt that process and reduce the number of suicides. Finally, I think the partnerships that we've been able to, um, the partnerships that we've been able to build with veterans organizations, healthcare professionals, somewhat law enforcement, depending on the agency, have been really, really useful. And those are the trusted people that folks want to hear from when we're doing this work. Honestly, I think a lot of times politicians are not seen as the trusted voice in these conversations. And that's fine. I understand that. Politics can be really divisive on both sides. But when we have folks like doctors advocating for it, when we have police chiefs, when they were advocating for it, it made a huge difference. Um, veterans who are against gun violence, that means a lot to people. And so building out those sort of coalitions is incredibly important, and it makes it so much easier to get things across the line because people in community trust these individuals and they want to hear from those individuals more than they want to hear from legislators. Is there one more slide?
I think there's one more slide, and it's a great point you brought up because our next speaker is Dr. Catherine Hoops, who's a great partner. So I want to make sure we get to her.
Perfect. I'll be very quick. So the last thing I'm going to say is having a model policy guide is so important because for us as legislators, the reality is we don't have a lot of time to get things done. Minnesota is a part-time legislature, which means we are in session from approximately January or February to May. So we really need to have that language ready to go and all lined up before we get into session. And we have to start normalizing and having conversations with stakeholders before we ever get into session. I think all the reasons that I've listed here are incredibly important, but making sure that we have a unified framework and that there is consistency across the states in what we are doing makes a huge difference. And the final thing that I want to close with is that it is I don't know about how it is in other states, but in Minnesota, we never want to be the first people to do something. And I think that's true across the board in a lot of legislations. They don't want to be the first one to do it. So when we can point to other states that have done it or that are working towards it or that are using that same model policy, it goes a long way to normalizing it and helping people feel more comfortable with the idea, especially when we can get things like this done in states that are more red, because Minnesota as a purple state is very difficult to convince folks of doing things. So when we see model policy that's being used in both blue states and red states, it makes folks in the legislature and folks in Minnesota in general feel more comfortable with the language. So I'll leave it at that, but really happy to be here and happy to continue advocating for this important policy.
Well, we're going to come back with some questions. So don't, if you can, please stay. And of course, you just opened the door for us to say we would love to work with you in the future. So thank you for that. So now we're going to go to Dr. Catherine Hoops, who's been a real innovator in the clinical space around safe storage and counseling of parents and others. So Dr. Hoops, we are so glad that you're here with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to add a little bit of data to round out our conversation. And as a pediatrician who cares for critically ill and injured children, including all too often kids who've been injured by firearms, there are just a few things that I want to highlight. And, maybe if anybody joined late, or it's just something that I think is worth saying 3 times in the course of this webinar, is that firearms are overall the leading cause of death for children in the US, ages 1 to 17. And kids are being exposed to potential risks in the home. As you heard from Representative Hollins, consistent across the board nationally, that a third of homes with kids have firearms in them. And meanwhile, over half of gun owners in homes with children don't securely store all their firearms consistently. And kids are then being exposed to these risks. And by preventing unauthorized users from accessing firearms is critical, right? We know that 80% of youth who die by firearm suicide obtain that gun from their home or the home of a family member. And over 80% of school shootings that were perpetrated by youth were also carried out using a gun from their home or that of friends or family members. But safe storage interrupts that pathway from exposure to injury, from access to use, and that makes sense. And we've applied this public health approach to other sources of potential injury many times before. The same way that child safety lids on medications can help to prevent toxic ingestions, safe storage also acts as a barrier to use by those who weren't authorized to do so, kids and others. And safe storage laws really help to promote adoption of safe storage behaviors at home. If you want to go to the next slide. We know from decades of research that safe storage laws, although, again, very heterogeneous across the states that have them, are associated with significant reductions in suicide and homicide and unintentional injuries, especially among young people. A couple of elements that I want to highlight in particular, safe storage laws have been shown to reduce youth suicide by 12% and, youth firearm deaths overall by between 6 and 32%, looking at these data in aggregate. If you want to go to the next slide again. And, I know that I'm a pediatrician, I tend to be laser focused on kids, but this is an effective intervention throughout the life course. As Dr. Krafasi mentioned earlier, those heightened in-home storage measures and that pyramid that we showed before, heightened in-home protections or even out-of-home storage are used as really effective strategies to reduce access to lethal means when someone is at risk for suicide. So, when someone attempts suicide with a firearm, 90% of those attempts result in death. So, taking opportunities to interrupt that pathway from exposure to use to injury, similarly, interrupting that pathway from ideation, suicidal ideation, to a suicide attempt can be life-saving. And sometimes I talk about these barriers as being barricades versus speed bumps. That barricade might be a safe for a toddler, but that speed bump can also be life-saving by creating, a pause to access your gun safe or to even unlock a cable lock. That pause can be life-saving. It can be an opportunity for someone to ask for help. So again, this is protective throughout the life course, but of course, especially among kids. And however, we still have to figure out how best to promote these behaviors, right? We know these stronger policies are effective, and there's a lot of guidance on how to build out the strongest, most effective safe storage laws in the guide. But these laws can't work optimally if people don't know they exist or don't understand how to implement them or don't have the resources to do so or an understanding of their importance. And that's why some of those partnerships are so critical and why education is so critical. A lot of our research and programs work to increase clinical counseling on safe storage, specifically, but also contribute to that broader conversation that we've been talking about secure storage among families or parents planning a play date. We all have a role in promoting safe and secure storage. But for clinicians who may be participating today, or for those of you who might receive this kind of education from your clinicians, we know that those trusted relationships are really important. It's an important setting for sharing this kind of information. And people are 3 times as likely to store guns safely after having these conversations about safe storage with their physician. So gun owners need to understand how to practice secure storage in ways that are appropriate for them and why doing so consistently is so important. And that's how we, as trusted messengers in our communities, can help to promote these behaviors. And I just want to show one more thing as we transition to the Q&A, and just leave everybody with this visual, right? If you've never used a cable lock before, certainly a hard-sided safe is our preferred safe storage mechanism, but this quick video It looks like it has stalled here, but can show how to apply a cable lock to a semi-automatic pistol. And, especially for our patients, families, individuals with limited resources, perhaps, this is $5.25 that can save a life. These can be used quickly and easily and affordably to interrupt that pathway, to create a barrier to use by unauthorized users as a means of external safe storage. So with that, I will. Oh, there we go. There goes my video. And also many thanks to the Bogue family and Robust Futures for sharing these excellent videos with us, and there are more available that we highlight online. But Josh, I will turn it back to you for Q&A.
Yeah, what a great panel. Thank you so much. I've helped write the guide or at least edited it, and I learned some more today. So it's just always great. What would be great is, so yeah, please put your questions in the Q&A. We're going to do sort of like a lightning round and try to get through as many as we can, and we really will try to get to your questions. So please put it in the Q&A. That's definitely the best way to do it. We got a number of questions very on similar themes, and so I think I'm going to start by throwing this to Cass on two questions. Cass, people are saying, what are the opportunities for partnerships between other gun violence organizations or other state groups? And the second thing is about proprietary information. So people are like, can we use this information? Can we take it? And I'll give you the short answer, which is please. But then I'll let Cass go from there. So let's go to those two questions.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start off by saying we partner with lots of organizations. Catherine and I, when we first started doing this work, partnered really closely with Moms Demand Action and the Be Smart campaign and had them speak at events. So we think the partnership is fantastic. We also acknowledge that different organizations and individuals can bring a slightly different perspective. And so Catherine and I were both gun-owning moms. We have that perspective, coming from the public health research space that helps us as well. But yeah, across the board, local, state, and national groups, we are regularly partnering. And then we take something like this, a model policy guide, and we'll tailor it to work very specifically in states as well. So if you're here, your state doesn't have a law, reach out to us. We can partner with you to help make a state-specific guide as well.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And then, yes, please use the guide. Please take it, use it, all of the things with it, both this and the Safe Storage Toolkit.
Right. And someone asked how they can get copies, but the guide is all in PDF. So, we won't send like mail you 100 copies, but you're free to take it, go to Kinko's, wherever you go, and copy it, make lots, take the PDF and print it, please. It's there for you to use. So let me ask Representative Hollins a couple questions. And then we're going to keep on going around here. But you had some interesting data about unsecured guns in Minnesota. Do you know where the source of that data?
Yeah, I saw that question on the Q&A, and I wish
Yeah.
I had a better answer for you. I believe I took it from my notes from before, and I believe my House research team were the ones who got me the notes, so I'd have to check with them where they got it.
All right. Well,
Go ahead.
I teach health advocacy, and when I teach my students how to testify, and if there's a question they don't know, I said, we'll get you the data later. And so we'll get you the citation later on that, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll be happy to get that out. I was very interested in the discussion about cost of safe storage devices. So I recently bought a safe. It's numerical and a key. You can use either one. It was very inexpensive. And what I wonder your thoughts on, I think you would get into this, but I want to sort of drill down a little bit more on this, is that it seems like if you're going to spend a lot of money on a firearm, and firearms can be, from all sorts of different price range, but mostly hundreds of dollars at least. Should you think about safe storage as just the cost of buying a firearm? Like without it, does it make sense to get a firearm and not have safe storage devices? And also, so how do you think about that when you think about the purchase of a firearm? What should you be considering?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's common sense to think about making sure that you have a place to store your firearm if you're going to be purchasing it. And we know that when you go to purchase a firearm, for anybody who's done it, there's a number of different hoops that you have to jump through, including, filling out this information. We do background checks. We have, a whole process. And I don't understand why safe storage shouldn't just be a part of that process as you're going through it. That should be a question that you're asked when you are trying to purchase a gun. Do you have a place to store it? Is it locked? Is it secure? Do you understand? And certainly, I think with my hope of getting this legislation passed in the state of Minnesota, that could be a part of the conversation moving forward. The thing that frustrates me the most is the folks who are selling firearms. This could be a financial boon for them also. They get to sell they get to sell gun locks or gun safes along with it. So they should actually be advocating for it just as much as we are, because it's going to make them more money, because certainly when you're buying your gun, you're probably going to buy the lock or the secure storage right there with it. Um, so from a financial perspective, I think for regular people, what I do hear is folks saying, "Oh, it's expensive, it's difficult. I don't know which one to get." And so that's really where education comes in. But also, I think that, I mean, this is a public health crisis, right? And we invest in public health crises. When people need medication to prevent HIV, we try to make sure that it's affordable and accessible. This is the exact same thing we need to do with safe and secure storage. If it's an investment that we need to make to prevent loss of life, that is an investment that the state should be willing to make.
Is there, have you seen any legislation on tax credits around this issue in the past? We have that in Virginia where I live, so I was just wondering if that's something that's come up before.
I don't think I have seen that in the state of Minnesota, but I would be certainly interested in it. I think that's a great way to do things. Lord knows we love tax credits in Minnesota. So, that's certainly one way of moving forward with it. I know that we had some folks, I think from a particular organization, that were offering, they had purchased a certain number of those very simple locks that you were talking about and handing them out for free to folks, saying like, we just want you to safely store those guns. And that was in particular in the Twin Cities, so in urban areas where they thought folks would, maybe need a little extra push. But I think we could do something like that statewide also.
Well, then I'm going to bring Dr. Hoops, into the discussion because I believe that you give out a lot of gun locks. How do you do that? How big is the program? How do you scale that?
Yeah. So we're fortunate to be able to give gun safes and locks away to a lot of our patients and families. We have various mechanisms to support this, device distribution in our clinical settings, mostly grant funded and other. But I think, the fact is that firearms come into people's homes through a variety of ways, and many gun owners are very price sensitive, and so we want to create opportunities to give these away at little or no cost to families who have firearms in their home. So through some of our work, we've been able to support giving away not only those cable locks, right? That's kind of the most common one to be given away because it's the least expensive, right? So you can, purchase those for, if you're buying in bulk, about $2.50 a piece, and give away lots of them. And a lot of
$2.50.
$2.50
Thank you.
if you're buying in bulk, right? Not if you're going and buying a single one, but so those can affordably be purchased for large scale distribution. But when we're talking about buying, larger hard-sided safes, certainly a safe for, a small collection of rifles is going to be quite expensive. But you can give away cable locks, and we are able to support giving away quick access hard-sided safes that use a biometric lock and a key code lock as a backup to our patients and families. But ultimately, I think that the device that people choose is the device that they will use. So I think it's really important in these kinds of programs to have a range of options if that's financially feasible for any program that you're developing, to be able to allow people to choose the device that makes the most sense for them, because that is the one that they will use most consistently. If it's consistent with their values, why they own the firearm in the first place, or their space constraints, whatever whatever it may be. The device they choose is the one they're most likely to use. So presenting a range of options is really helpful and what we always try to do in our device distribution programs.
And so is that something that's being scaled around the country? I know that I think you're working with physicians outside of Johns Hopkins as well, if I understand that correctly.
So as a part of our federally funded research, we are doing clinical trials on safe storage device distribution, counseling and screening programs through pediatric and adult trauma centers. So those are being implemented in 4 states, and hopefully over time we'll be able to scale this program and the device distribution component to more states nationwide. But right now that's going on in 4 states through pediatric and adult trauma centers.
Great. And if people want more information on that, they can call you or email you.
Absolutely. Yep. There's a contact function on our Act Fast online resource center that's linked through the Center for Gun Violence Solutions website. And also just to highlight for any clinicians or educators on the call, we also have a safe storage info sheet that's available in 8 languages, that's available to download, that can help to start some of these conversations in a clinical setting or in any setting, that helps to provide some of the rationale for why safe storage is important, how to do it, and where to learn more. So you can find those also on our clinical programs website that I think Joe put in the chat earlier.
Excellent. So let me go back to Dr. Kafasi for closing, sort of a couple of lightning rounds. I've got a bunch of questions in the chat about data. So there's one question about, I guess, Gen Z. Someone said that they believe gun death is the leading cause of death for 13 to 28-year-olds. I can't verify that. But I did want, and then I got another question. We got another question about how to get the best place for state data. So can you tell us a little bit about data sources, where to find information?
So we have some great pages on our website. If you search for the Center for Gun Violence Solutions, we have a page for each state showing the various gun deaths. Each year, we also produce an annual report looking at the leading causes of firearm deaths. We're getting very close to releasing one specific on suicide for the 2023 data. But you can also go out to CDC's website. The website is called Wonder, WONDER, and you can access this data. There are some fact sheets from the CDC. So either our center or the CDC center are 2 really great places to find that information at the state level, even down to the county or city level, depending on the size.
Okay. I think that's a great place to stop. I think we've given you some tools and some information about how to, where to get our guide, what to think about with safe storage. We've also given you some places to find some data in your state. I think we also want to remind people that all of us are here to assist. This is a passion for ours. We spend a lot of time with this guide because we want people to use it. So, we love your inquiries to come back to us. Joe, I don't know if I'm just asking our comms team who's on the call whether we have the ability to answer some of the questions that we didn't get to today, but we will do the best. Joe just put his email there, so please send questions there. I want to thank the panelists. This is something I think in this moment that we can talk about in a bipartisan manner, and I think that's very important. There's some questions about how do we talk to people, and I can't tell you how to necessarily persuade people. I always think that just bringing facts and data still matters, and we've given you a lot of tools on that today, and to start those conversations. So I want to thank all the panelists today for being here and giving us your time in a very busy time, and especially Representative Hollins in this very difficult time. And again, condolences to your whole state and to all the legislators in Minnesota. And then I also want to give a special thanks to Maggie Emery, as the Executive Director of Protect Minnesota, who's our really good partners here. And I just really want to thank them for all the work they did to help us organize this webinar and their partnership in general. So thanks everybody for their time today. Thank all the participants and the people who came and listened, and I hope you have a great afternoon.